right, everyone. Going live in 3, 2, 1. All right, everyone. Hope everyone is doing good. It is Friday, December 19th, 2026. So I wanted to take the time today to get some of these lives done. We have a lot of I have a lot of lives planned. I'm planning a YouTube channel, so Facebook has the unique experience of getting these lives and reviews first, and then it will be dropped on YouTube. This is my litmus test. Easiest way to do it live, get already some viewers out there, and then download this video and put it on YouTube. So I'm doing a series of these, trying to deviate from all the Trump madness and all that, and to try to show people, educate people, some political education and culture, rather than it being Trump every minute. So but yeah, it's a good Friday so far. It's sunny, it's nice and warm. I went out this morning and picked up around the house, and it looks really good. So but yeah, my goal for the rest of the year is to get a lot of these lives out. So we have John Adams today. We have Ulysses Grant coming up next, and then we also have a book called 1776 that's going to be reviewed as well. And then from there, we're going to start, we'll do current day politics, and so on and so forth. But today, I wanted to talk about our second president of the United States, probably one of the most underrated presidents of the United States, which is John Adams. I read this book back in September, October, but like I said, I always have book reports that I write with this. So every time I finish a big book that I want to review, I'll write a big list, a big bullet list of what I remember and an outline. That way I can just come back to it and boom. Whether I want to do live or just want to remember the book. So this is a interesting backstory about John Adams. I got on a real John Adams kick last year when it came, to this whole history thing, because I got into the HBO series, John Adams miniseries. I had watched it as a kid when I was a teenager. I had liked it then, but I wasn't that so much interested, because back then I wasn't that interested in the Revolutionary War. So I had decided this summer, I was bored, and I just decided to watch the series again. And I was so enthralled by the series because of the accuracy and how I read online. It was closely aligned with the book it was based off of. So I go and get the book, right? I read the book all the way through. It's called, it was an audiobook, so I listened to it all the way through. It was about 35 hours. And then I got on a real kick and then went to Boston to go see at the actual things that happened. So I got to see the Boston Massacre, the Boston Tea Party, John Adams' residence, and all of the other Boston historicals. So it really allowed me to see what was going on in those times in real time. So Boston's a beautiful city. I recommend it. The food's okay, a lot of decent food, but it's a real college town. So if you're a guy my age that's in his early 30s, probably not that fun, because like I said, it's a big college town. All right, so let's get started. So this John Adams book was written by David McCullough. It was about 1,000 pages or 30 plus hours long. So however you want to read your book. And what's interesting about John Adams is, like I said, he's underrated when it comes to the founding fathers, when it comes to Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Hamilton, etc. But he was good enough to have his own book, just like those others, right? So John Adams was born in Braintree, Massachusetts, to a farmer. That farmer was well connected throughout the Massachusetts community, and John Adams lived a decent life. He lived a good childhood. He went to school. It was a sort of a Quaker lifestyle a little bit, because of who he was surrounded with and who his father was connected to. So eventually he went through Harvard and he became a lawyer. through Harvard, he learns discipline. At first he was a real undisciplined kid, right? He was a little bit mouthy, sometimes lazy. So Harvard was kind of like military. It kind of got him out of that funk and disciplined him really well. They reading about that book is you learn that college is a lot different back then than it was now. Now it's lenient. They try to make it fun. It's more of a party vibe. Back then it was very military style. All the boys stay in one room, all the girls stay in one room, and they learn and they do chores all the way up to it's time to go. So back then, college, staying on campus for Harvard or things like that wasn't that fun. It was kind of like going to the military or something. So after he goes through Harvard, he goes back to Boston and he starts becoming a lawyer. During that time, he marries a woman named Abigail Smith, and this is in the 1760s. This is a daughter of a Colonel Smith, who was big in Boston and was also a slave owner. So after he married Abigail Smith, he had children with Abigail, which included Charles, the other famous president, John Quincy Adams, Nabby. I think her name was Abigail as well, but they call her Nabby, and then Thomas. So in the 1760s, John Adams is coming off of Harvard, and he marries Abigail. And in between then, he has the children, as the ones I just listed. And then now he's a lawyer. So now the turning point of this is that his biggest case is now the Boston Massacre. The Boston Massacre was one of the first interactions of the British Redcoats and the American civilians having tensions. So it resulted in a mass attack of people getting killed, civilians getting killed. Crispus Attucks, if people don't remember that name, he was the famous casualty of the Boston Massacre. So John Adams, still being loyal to the Crown, or the UK rather, he decides to defend the Redcoats in this case. So there's a famous trial. Not only it was referenced in the book, but referenced in the miniseries as well, where the Redcoats were on trial, and John Adams successfully got them off the case, got them acquitted. And it was a lot of polarized reaction, but that case right there was the one that put him on the map when it came to national attention and politics. Okay? And then he was elected. So he does the lawyership, right? He does the case. And then after the case, this is when he gets elected to the Congressional Congress. So that Boston Massacre case, you have the events of the Revolutionary, and then that's when the Continental Congress is formed up. So once John Adams is elected to the the Continental Congress, he has to go between Philly and other locations during the war. During this time, there's a lot of family sacrifices, right? Abigail has to run the house with her children, so she's a single mother. And there's also some sicknesses that go on between their family members and their friends. So there's a lot of sadness and sacrifice going on, and they're upset because they haven't seen each other in sometimes 3 or 4 years at a time. So the sacrifices that happened during the Boston Massacre, the Revolutionary War, in that period, they've seen each other very seldomly. So during this time, though, John Adams does help draft the Declaration of Independence with Thomas Jefferson. He had a lot of input in that document, so he was one of the eyes and ears for those documents. So after the Declaration of Independence is drafted and he's elected to the Congressional Congress, the Revolutionary War keeps going on. And with that, John Adams has to go overseas now. The Continental Congress decides to put him overseas. So now John Adams goes to France to meet up with other ambassadors like Ben Franklin, John Jay, and that crew. So he spends a number of years over there trying to secure funding for the Revolutionary War, because we couldn't win the Revolutionary War with just what we have here, our resources, etc. So we had to have a lot of foreign influence when it came to the Revolutionary War. So they dispatched Ben Franklin, John Adams, John Jay, and then eventually Thomas Jefferson to secure French aid for the Revolutionary War. So over the years in France, he has a hard time struggling, trying to make friends and get used to the French culture. So with that, he has a lot of disagreements with Benjamin Franklin, because Benjamin Franklin was more of a laissez-faire, easy guy. So he wasn't always in the office. He was the kind of dude that closed deals on the dinner table, whereas John Adams was more of an administrative, punctual, non-business, how do I say, doesn't know how to be friendly outside of business. So, it looks like a bad match, but in retrospect, you have someone that's on top of all the administrative items, and then you have someone that does the social aspect, which is probably just as important as the admin items. So after securing funds in France, the United States wins the Revolutionary War. So with that, John Adams is sent to Dutchland and London, which is to set up that portion of getting funds and money is to help set up the government, help pay off debts, and get credit going. Credit was the biggest thing that we needed for our country. So getting credit and trade going with other European powers, that was Adams' assignment in Europe. So two legs to Adams' trips to Europe, right? He's got one leg in France where he secures foreign support for the Revolutionary War, and then the second part is where he goes to the Dutchland in London, where he tries to set up funding and credit and loans for the country to get up and going. So with all that going around, all that being there, he comes back to the United States. I also forgot to mention, when he's in France and when he's in London and Dutchland, and then the better part of France, his wife and his children finally join him. So those years longs of separation finally ends after he just decides to bring them along. So he comes back to the States. That's during that time he's gone. The Articles of Confederation are made. The Constitution is made. So he doesn't see all of that. He misses all that drama. So he comes back, and then he's elected vice president because he's a famous, he's a delegate. He not only did he secure funds for the war in the country, he also was part of the Treaty of Versailles. So he had a lot of, and then he was also a congressman then. So back then, before president and what the current political structure we have today, what he has, what he was he was a big celebrity. He was a big celebrity. So with all that celebrity, he comes back, and then he becomes vice president. With vice president, he finds it very boring, right? He finds that George Washington is not including him in any meetings when it comes to cabinet meetings or any big decisions. He also finds that the Senate is really tough to manage. So in pockets of periods of time, he takes a step back. He goes back to Peacefield, which is his home. He spends months there. He goes to the Senate. He'll brew there for a bit, but he's really frustrated of how he thought the vice presidency was going to be a lot better. So he tries to make the best of it. So what he does is he starts making a lot of rules for the Senate. He starts establishing Senate culture, Senate rules, Senate guidelines. So that's one of the things that can be defined by his vice presidency, is shaping the Senate and being the first first president of the Senate. So after 8 years of that, he then becomes the president of the United States. It was a tough election where Hamilton and Jefferson were really wrestling for those votes, and ultimately Hamilton tipped it into Adams's favor, which is how he became president. It's all because of Hamilton. That's why he's famous. But we'll do that. We're going to do that live soon. So he becomes president, right? And then he builds. This is when it starts getting good, right? He builds a navy. He provides continuity past George Washington, because that's what everyone was scared of. But then it starts to get a little bit rocky. He avoids war with France, right? Which is good in retrospect, but back then it was a really wanted thing. It was something that Hamilton was pushing him to do. It's something his own cabinet was pushing him to do, and the public. So you have a lot of people pushing you to go to war when you're the only one that says no. So ultimately, that was a good decision to not to go to war with France, because we could not afford it. So that ends up pissing people off, and with his personality, he doesn't really have a popular personality. It's very hot-headed, very cold. So all this with avoiding war with France and his personality leaves a nasty taste in people's mouth. And then there was also the Sedition Acts, which included a lot of legal powers to persecute people when it comes to treason, bashing your country. And it also included the what the fuck was that name? I believe excuse me if I'm wrong, but the Sedition Acts, where the freedom of speech is was violated when it came to one of the bills having a a provision: if you talk bad against the government, you'll get arrested. So the Sedition Acts really upset a lot of people and set a course for our history to where the government is now in more of a surveillance mode than being a free country. So after 4 years of a lot of controversy and a little bit of a rocky administration, this was also coupled with controversy between him and George Washington about who was going to lead the army that was in place. John Adams did ask George Washington to lead the army, lead the provisional army, just to show France and other foreign nations that we still have credibility in the army and as well as our general. So Washington agreed. However, Washington wanted his own staff, which included Alexander Hamilton as the second in command. Well, John Adams said, no, that's not going to work. So John Adams designated his own staff. And with that, it really left a nasty taste in George Washington's mouth. So they left on kind of a rocky note. So after these 4 years, he loses re-election to Thomas Jefferson. That was another Hamiltonian effort, because it was either Aaron Burr or Thomas Jefferson. So Hamilton chose. This is a famous quote too. He said, "I think I can't stand Thomas Jefferson from head to toe, but he is an honest and good person, and therefore I cannot elect Aaron Burr." So Hamilton, being a party leader and an insider, he maneuvers the votes all to Thomas Jefferson. So Thomas Jefferson then becomes president. So John Adams is relieved, because he's like, man, I've just had about 25 years of nonstop, all the way from, let's take it back, maybe about almost 30 years. The Boston Massacre, the Continental Congress, going overseas, those 3 legs, like I mentioned, being vice president than president. So in 1800, he finally gets to retire. He is actually one of the first presidents that lived in the White House. So he starts retirement in Peacefield, Massachusetts, and then lucky for him, and like Thomas Jefferson, he has a long retirement. So he has about a 25-year, almost 26-year retirement. So during those 26 years, he does see a lot of death. Daughter Abigail, or Nabby, she died of breast cancer. So that was in 1805. And then his wife Abigail had died as well in 1818 or 1819, I believe. So she predeceased him. Also his son Charles Adams, who did struggle in life when it came to, being well composed and put together, possibly because John Adams wasn't always there for him. So he died of liver cirrhosis at age 30. But a caveat is, he did live long enough to see his son become president of the United States. So considering where John Quincy was as a child, watching his father in Boston, going with him overseas, it's a full culmination when now he becomes president of the United States. So during his retirement, John Adams is doing all the ceremonial pitches and getting the Peacefield House rebuilt. And so now he's spending his days writing letters. So during his retirement, it was his wife Abigail that actually got Thomas Jefferson to write John Adams, because they were all friends. So, let's say, you have a group of friends, and it's the wife's friend, the husband's friends, and they were all friends like that. They were all cool like that. So Abigail reaches out to Thomas Jefferson because they were cool. They were good friends. It's like, hey, how are you? Why don't you write John? He could use it. And so they actually start a long correspondence over the years, which is actually a famous thing in history. That I think, if I'm not mistaken, those correspondence letters is a book and is constantly referenced when it comes to different historical books and works, etc. So this famous Thomas Jefferson John Adams correspondence goes on for about maybe 15-20 years, and then finally they both die on July 4th, 1826. Thomas Jefferson being the first, and then John Adams being the second. So not only was it the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, of when we became a nation, but also both presidents died, both founding fathers died on the same day. So next year is going to be really special because not only do we have our 250th anniversary, we have the 200th anniversary of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams passing away. So overall, I think John Adams was a key player in the American founding of our country. He could be a little bit underrated when it comes to George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, since their accomplishments are, being the author of Declaration of Independence, securing the Louisiana Purchase. Those are things that, go over John Adams. So, but not to mention all the good work that John Adams did, being a part of the Continental Congress, securing funds for not only our nation to fight the war, but to get started, and then becoming our first president and vice president, and always doing things the right way. If you learn about him as a person, you would know that he was a very strict person, always meant to do well, very hardworking, very religious, and always did things to the fullest effort. So always, and made some good decisions. Sometimes, his presidency wasn't perfect, but when it came to things like the French War, avoiding the war with France, and providing continuity to the nation. His service to this country was very important. So, all right, well, that ends my live. We just capped it off at 25 minutes. So yeah, look forward to the next live. We're gonna knock these out before the end of the year, and that way we can view all of these on YouTube. All right, well, thank you.